I've trained a number of chefs during my 30 years in the kitchen, and now in the same way I'm able to teach you right here in your own home. It's all about raising the standards. So set up your laptops, sharpen your knives, and get ready to enjoy the techniques and tips from my kitchen. Right, well today we're going to make a mushroom risotto. I've got selected ingredients in front of me here. I've got some dried shiitakes which I've soaked overnight in cold water. I use dried shiitakes because they don't give off too much colour. So just need to be a little bit careful with the type of mushrooms that you use. No old dark brown mushrooms because you'll end up with a grey or dirty looking risotto. Got a couple of nice white button mushrooms here. Onion, a couple of cloves of garlic, some butter, some Italian parsley. I've got some good olive oil there, some parmesan and some arborio rice. Only use arborio rice, it makes the best risottos. So what we're going to start with is I'm going to start with slicing up the mushrooms. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Use your cook's knife. Okay, it's the main knife we use in the kitchen. It's got a wide blade, enables you to slice or hopefully slice these mushrooms without cutting your fingers. So just hold your fingers on top, keep your thumb tucked behind, and use this part of the knife because there's less action. You don't have to move your knife up too far. Keep the tip of the knife on the board, and that way you won't or shouldn't cut your fingers. So just slice mushrooms through nice and thinly. Don't try to do too many at once. You also want to make sure that your knife is sharp. You probably end up cutting your fingers if you're using a blunt knife because you're putting too much force into the knife itself. The art of cooking really is mainly in the preparation. You should get all your preparation done before you start doing anything. It's much easier. The preparation is done and the whole cooking process will become much easier. Okay, so we'll pop those back into our bowl. We're now going to just slice up the white button mushrooms. I'm going to leave the stalks on. These are really nice and white. Just make sure that there's no dirt on them. I just brush them off with a clean, dry cloth. These are really nice and white and nice little tight cups. So you can. If it gets too hard to slice, just turn it over and slice it that way. Just make it easy for yourself. If you want to do that, slice them in half, flat side down. Saves them rolling around on the board. There's always an easy way of doing everything. So make sure again you choose nice little white mushrooms. These are great. So again, pop those into the board. So just give your board a quick wipe down because we're going to be cutting up our onion. Right, I've left the root on the bottom. What that does is it keeps the onion together, so when you're cutting it up it doesn't fall apart. It makes it much easier to dice. So we're just going to cut off the top. So we're going to start by cutting the onion horizontal. So keep your eyes on the onion. I usually put my hand flat on top of the onion and just a little bit of weight and just gently 3/4 of the way through. So straight through like that. Not all the way through, otherwise again it's going to fall apart. And so that's the first cuts that we're going to do. I'm now going to cut it straight down. Again, just 3/4 of the way through, and I'll show you why in a second. So now that onion is all held together by the root on the end here. And you're just going to, again, same method, keep the tip of the knife on the board and just gently cut through the onion. Hold your fingers tightly around the sides and that'll stop it from falling apart. And when you get to the end here, lie it down and do the same thing again that you did right at the start. So just cut a couple of cuts through there because it's only a small piece. Down like that, and then straight through. So always keep that tip of the knife on the board. That little end piece there, just run the knife through the onion. And that's your onion nicely diced. I don't know of any method really that's going to stop you from crying when you're slicing up an onion, other than wearing a ski mask. But if your knife is sharp, that will also help to stop the vapour from rising you know, from cutting the onion, because they have little pockets of juice in there and they'll spray into your eye. So use a sharp knife, that'll help to stop it. Okay, so that's our onion. We can put that back into our bowl. Get all that off. And we're now going to cut up or crush our garlic. We've got a couple of cloves of garlic here, and what I'm going to do is just use the flat part of my blade, and I'm going to give it a good bash with my palm of my hand, and just to crush the garlic. Now we don't have to get it too fine. I just want to give it just a nice little chop. Just remember, just keep that tip of the knife on your board. So that's one garlic clove. We'll do the next one. So give it a good bash. That'll do. So that's all our preparation done. We're now going to move over to the stove, and I'll show you how to cook the risotto. Okay, now we've got our ingredients here. I've got a shallowish pan here so I can get everything in there, and I can see it, and it's going to be cooked more evenly than having it in a deeper pot. So I'm going to start with the olive oil. Now we want to sweat the garlic and the onions. So when I talk about sweating, I'm talking about cooking it without any colour. So we want to develop the sugars, and that'll give us more flavour and give us more of a rounded flavour right at the end. So we'll start with the onions and the garlic. So again, we don't want any colour on this on the onions. So just keep them moving. If it's too hot, just turn the temperature down a little bit. So you can see them, they'll start to soften and become more translucent. Okay, I'm now going to add our mushrooms. So we're going to add the shiitakes and the little bite buttons. So these will take a little bit of cooking. We want to develop the flavour and cook the mushrooms so they're nice and soft. And when we add the stock, they're not going to go a grey, sort of dark browny colour. So keep it moving, and that way you're not going to end up with too much colour on your onions. Now while they're browning, I've got chicken stock here. You can use a vegetable stock if you really want to. That needs to be boiling. That way the cooking process with risotto is shortened and the rice doesn't take too long to cook and become really overcooked or creamy. With this, the method that we're using today is that the risotto that I'm making doesn't necessarily need any stirring, or as little as possible. A lot of people really stir them far too often, and breaks down the rice, the outer husk of the rice. It becomes creamy and, in my belief, probably uneatable really. So the rice still needs to be, the grains still need to be free, much more pleasant to eat. There's a lot of different risottos you can make, obviously, but they're all made possibly slightly differently. You know, we put the mushrooms in at the beginning because we want the flavour of the mushrooms to go through the rice. If you're making a seafood risotto, sometimes the seafood will go in at the end, so you obviously don't want to overcook the seafood. And at Biscombe Bolton, we make a butternut risotto, and that's served with we serve that with our fish. So there's lots of different varieties you can do. Just depends on what process you're actually going to use. Okay, so it's really started to cook down nicely. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the rice. So just sprinkle that over. So we want to just very lightly toast it, and there's still a bit of oil in here, so that wants to really coat all of the rice particles. But we don't want it sticking to the bottom of the pan. So keep it moving. All that rice has been coated with the excess oil that was in there, and that's why you're using plenty of olive oil in at the start. So we develop that colour, and now we're going to add some white wine, and that'll just take the richness away from the risotto itself. So when we finish it at the end with the parmesan, it's not too rich at all. So a little bit of, you can use lemon juice, but most people are using a little bit of white wine. So got the wine in there, so we want to reduce that down so it becomes slightly syrupy. Just give it a little shake around. It won't take long because the pan is quite shallow, and that's the reason that I've used a shallow pan. So once that rice has absorbed the wine, which is just about has, I'm going to start adding a chicken stock. I've got chicken stock here. Now I'm going to add it a couple of ladles at a time. I don't want to add too much at the start because we're not going to be able to control how much the stock is actually absorbed into that rice. Add a couple of ladles. I always have a little bit more stock than you need, because if you do run out during the cooking process, it's not that easy to reheat it quick enough. Now I'm going to leave that. I don't want to stir that now. Once the stock is in there, we're going to let that absorb all the stock, and it's probably going to take about 5 or 6 minutes before we need to add the next lot of chicken stock. Okay, got some parmesan which I'm going to grate. I'm going to use this microplaner. These are a very fine sort of grater. Much easier than a household grater that we use at home. So I just very gently, I just need about a cupful of parmesan. I want to remember, just keep an eye on your risotto. I can hear that my risotto is going to need a bit more stock, so I'm just going to put another ladle full of stock in here. So just give it a little shake so that it's not sticking to the bottom of the pan, which is fine. It's nice and free, and I'm just going to leave that again till it absorbs the rest of that chicken stock. So need a bit more parmesan. I was really very lucky enough to work with an Italian chef for really only it was about half a day, and this is where I learned how to make a risotto, in his eyes, the correct way. And he taught me not to stir a risotto. There's a lot of people that do stir a risotto. But he was adamant that there was only one way to make a risotto, and that was his way. So ever since then, that's the way that I've actually made it, and it really does make a difference. It's not as gluggy. The other thing that with the way that he made it was that the risotto is actually quite wet, and not as gluggy as we tend to make in New Zealand. So really, I learnt a lot. Only for spending sort of 3 or 4 hours with this guy, but he was a very, very good chef, so I was very lucky. I'm just going to go and check risotto again. So just, if you want to, just give it a little stir, make sure it's not stuck, and that's not far off from being finished. Now if you have a dinner party, say at home, you could easily stop it at this stage, and then if you wanted to finish it off when your guests arrive, you could come back just half an hour before service and just carry on the process and finish it off that way. Then you've got at least some time to spend with your guests. So just take a couple of grains out if you want and check to see whether they're still al dente. They still need just a fraction more, so I'm going to add a little bit more stock to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to check the risotto, make sure that the rice is cooked. I've been checking it through the cooking process, make sure that it hasn't overcooked, it's still al dente. So I'm just going to give it another check. Yeah, it's good. It's still going to need a bit more seasoning. We've still got to add our parmesan to it. So I'm going to bring it over here. And as you can see, the grains are still nice and free. It's not all gluggy. So I'm going to add our butter to it and beat that in. Just use a wooden spoon so you don't get any discoloration from a metal spoon. Right, just going to, lots of parmesan. Check the seasoning after we've added the parmesan, because it's, as you know, it's quite salty and quite strong in flavour. So it's not too dry, it's actually still quite wet. So we got lots of, I can smell the flavour's fantastic. Yeah, it's good. It needs a wee bit more parmesan. So drop that in. And now we're going to add some sea salt and some fresh ground pepper. So lots and lots of pepper. So that should do it. I'm going to pop that in just before we serve it. So I want to keep that Italian parsley really nice and vibrant and fresh. So I'm just going to remove the bowl from the oven. Okay, it's nice and hot. And a nice big spoonful of your risotto. And remember, it's quite rich, so there's only so much of this you can eat, but I'm just going to sprinkle the remaining parmesan on there and just a few leaves of Italian parsley. So that's one of my favourite risottos. You've got a shiitake mushroom risotto with Italian parsley leaves, and I hope you enjoy it.